The universe does not keep silent forever. Commander Elias Vance stood on the bridge of the survey corvette Pathfinder, a place that felt more like a library than a cockpit. Screens displayed gravitational resonance charts instead of weapon trajectories. His uniform was dark blue pragmatic, yet the lines of it spoke of diplomatic service rather than military command. Outside the forward viewport lay the Tartarus anomaly, a churning wound in space-time where physics went to die. It was a place where sane captains did not venture, a graveyard of ships and ambitions. Yet here they were drawn by a whisper from the deep. A signal that was not a signal, a ghost in the system's background radiation. The hum had started 3 cycles ago. It was a clean, impossibly structured vibration on a frequency long thought dead, a relic of humanity's expansionist first colonial era. It was less a sound and more a feeling, a deep thrum that vibrated in the fillings of your teeth. Solon, the ship's mind, had isolated it from the anomaly's chaos. The AI's synthesized voice was a calm counterpoint to the visual static. The source is massive, Commander. Gravitational displacement suggests a construct exceeding 30 kilometers in length. It is remarkably unnaturally inert. Vance stared at the central display, where a faint sigil pulled from a 1,000-year-old navigator's chart was overlaid on their position. It was a perfect set of scales cradled within a circle. The old ways are not dead, only sleeping. His first officer, Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova, shifted her weight beside him. Her presence was a sharp contrast to Vance's quiet contemplation. She was all focused energy and tactical assessment. "Scavengers think so too," she said, her voice tight. "The Vulture fleet under Kalin. They just translated in at the system's edge. 3 cruisers, a dozen support craft. They're not here for the stellar phenomena." Vance nodded, his gaze fixed on the anomaly. The stakes were simple and brutal. A piece of first colonial technology, a potential miracle or a doomsday weapon, was sleeping in that storm. He was here to ensure it fell into the right hands, and the vultures were decidedly the wrong ones. Deep within the gravitational tides, something vast and patient waited for a key. A faint light blinked on a forgotten console, a standby light on a system that hadn't been powered for a millennium. In the orbital shantytown above Neos Epsilon, a child listened to her grandfather's story. He spoke of the Tartarus anomaly not as a scientific curiosity, but as the lair of the ghost judge. "They say it was a ship built by the first fathers." The old man rasped, his voice thin like worn parchment. "Not to fight wars, but to end them. It doesn't fire guns, it hands down sentences." The child looked out the smudged viewport at the distant shimmering nebula. She wondered what kind of sentence a starship could possibly deliver. The old man coughed a dry, dusty sound. "It waits for a righteous hand to wake it, a hand that knows the weight of things." "They're deploying sensor drones," Elias Rostova reported, her knuckles white where she gripped the console's edge. "Kalin is impatient. He's probing the anomaly's fringes, looking for a stable path." Vance watched the tactical display. The red icons of the Vulture fleet moved with a predatory confidence. They were looters, yes, but competent ones. They knew how to carve open forgotten treasures. His own vessel, the Pathfinder, was a scientific craft, armed with little more than survey charges and a single defensive laser grid. It was a penknife in a gunfight. "The first choice is always the hardest. Solon, what is the probability of us reaching the object before Kalin can establish a stable entry vector?" Vance asked, his voice steady. "The AI's avatar." A simple column of blue light pulsed on the auxiliary screen. "Assuming Kalin's force continues its current methodical approach, our probability is 78.4%. Our vessel is smaller, more agile. We can navigate the gravitational shears he must first map." The AI paused a calculated beat. However, the probability of us surviving a direct confrontation afterward is 3.2%. Rostova's jaw tightened. A risk worth taking. We can't let them get their hands on whatever is in there. Vance agreed, but his mind was on a different calculus. It wasn't just about beating Kalen to the prize. It was about what they would find when they got there. The sigil of the scales suggested something other than a simple warship. It suggested judgment, balance, a system of order. You cannot command truth, you can only appeal to it. He felt a strange sense of reverence, a feeling out of place on the bridge of a modern starship. Plot a course, Solon. Maximum stealth, minimum energy signature. Take us into the storm. The Pathfinder shuddered as it slipped past the anomaly's event horizon. The universe outside the viewport twisted into a kaleidoscope of warped starlight. Gravitational waves washed over the hull, and the ship's internal stabilizers groaned in protest. Chief Engineer Kenji Tanaka's voice came over the comm, strained but calm. Hull integrity is at 96%, Commander. The anomaly is scraping at us, but the superstructure is holding. Vance acknowledged the report, his eyes scanning the forward view. Deep within the swirling chaos of dust and distorted light, a shadow began to resolve. It was a shape of impossible geometry, a line of perfect black against a sea of cosmic noise. A measure is only as good as the hand that wields it. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a monument. A single monolithic structure of obsidian-like material, 30 kilometers from tip to tip, shaped like a colossal stylized waybeam. There were no visible weapon emplacements, no engine signatures, no hangar bays. Its surface was covered in finely etched lines that resolved into trillions of tiny sigils, each a variation of the scales. The construct was utterly silent, absorbing all sensor scans without reflection. It was a hole in the universe, a statement of absolute presence. As the Pathfinder drew closer, the hum intensified, resonating directly within the minds of the crew. It wasn't a sound anymore. It was a query. "Commander Kalen's fleet is altering course," Rostova warned. "They've detected our approach. They're accelerating, plunging into the anomaly after us. They're willing to risk damage to intercept." Vance's focus remained on the monolith. The vultures were a problem for later. The real challenge was right in front of them. The monolith began to emit a soft internal light, a pale silver that traced the intricate patterns on its hull. A single focused beam of data streamed from the construct, bypassing every firewall and directly interfacing with Solon. The question is not, can you, but should you? The AI's calm voice filled the bridge, but for the first time it held a note of something akin to confusion. "Commander, I am receiving a data packet. It is not a communication protocol. It is a legal precedent, a hypothetical scenario." On the main screen, the data resolved into a complex ethical problem. A civilization facing imminent collapse from an external, implacable foe. A choice between sacrificing one of its own colony worlds to create a firebreak saving the other 10, or holding to its principles and risking total annihilation. There was no request for an answer. It was simply a statement, a problem left hanging in the void. Rostova frowned. "What is it?" "A security test, a password." Vance shook his head slowly. He felt a profound sense of clarity wash over him. This was not a test of logic or firepower. It was an interview. The ancient construct wasn't asking for the correct answer. It was asking who they were. "Solon, what is the optimal solution according to your ethical calculus?" The AI's light pulsed. "The logical course is to sacrifice the one colony. The utilitarian principle dictates that saving 10 worlds at the cost of one is the superior outcome. The probability of the species' survival increases by 89%. This is the weight of the crown. Vance listened, then turned to the screen displaying the hypothetical. He saw the faces of the colonists who would be sacrificed, the families, the homes, the culture that would be extinguished for the greater good. He thought of the cold, hard math and the vultures racing to defile this place with their simple greed. Kalen would probably not even bother to answer. He would simply start shooting, trying to pry the monolith open with brute force. Vance knew that was the wrong approach. This was a dialogue, and it required a thoughtful response. Solon disregard the utilitarian calculus. Vance commanded, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Do not answer their question. Instead, I want you to transmit a new file. From our own historical archives, find the record of the Treaty of Elysian, specifically the addendum on the rights of stateless refugees. Solon's avatar flickered. Commander, that precedent is considered by many legal scholars to be strategically naive. It places the burden of care on the host state without demanding reciprocity. It is not a logically optimal doctrine. Rostova looked at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. A ledger does not forget the ink. It's not about optimization, Solon Vance said softly. It's about principle. The Elysian Treaty was our civilization's promise to itself, a promise that we would never again treat human lives as acceptable losses on a balance sheet. It was our declaration that some things are more important than survival. He looked at the silent monolith on the screen. Show them that we have learned from our own history. Show them that we understand that the law is not a tool to achieve an outcome, but a principle to be upheld regardless of the cost. There was a long moment of silence on the bridge, broken only by the hum of the ship's life support. The monolith hung in the void, waiting. Then Solon spoke, its voice devoid of its earlier hesitation. Transmission sent, Commander. The data stream flowed from the Pathfinder to the ancient construct. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the silver light, tracing the sigils on the monolith's hull, brightened, shifting from a pale glow to a blinding, brilliant white. The hum escalated in frequency, becoming a pure, resonant chord that made the very structure of the Pathfinder sing. The deepest truths are written in light. The monolith. The great sleeping judge began to awaken. Its internal systems, dormant for millennia, drew power from the quantum foam. Arrays that had slumbered since the dawn of human expansion unfolded from hidden compartments, not as weapon barrels, but as vast, intricate sensor vanes and emitter dishes. The ship, which Vance now knew deserved a name other than the monolith, began to share its designation, a concept transmitted directly into their minds. It was the Reckoning, a saint ship, an archive of law, a final measure, and it had just accepted their answer. Commander, I am detecting a massive power surge from within the construct, Tanaka reported from engineering, his voice filled with awe. The energy readings are off the scale. It's like watching a star being born. At that moment, the Vulture fleet burst through the last veil of the anomaly. Kalen's flagship, the Carrion Crown, led the charge, its weapon ports already glowing with hostile energy. Hostile vessels have an intercept solution, Rostova shouted. Their firing beams of plasma and kinetic slugs lanced through the void, aimed not at the nimble Pathfinder, but at the awakening giant. A promise made must be a promise kept. The Vulture fleet's attack was an act of supreme arrogance. The projectiles and energy beams struck the hull of the Reckoning and simply vanished. They were absorbed without a flare of shielding, without a ripple of impact. The obsidian surface did not even scar. Kalen's voice, raw and unfiltered, crackled over the open channel. What in the void is that thing? All ships concentrate fire on the smaller vessel. Take the key, and we take the prize. The Vulture cruisers began to pivot, their targeting lasers painting the Pathfinder's hull. Before Rostova could even give a command to evade, a new presence filled the bridge. It wasn't a voice. It was a flow of pure, calm data that bloomed in their minds, originating from the Reckoning. It showed them tactical solutions, energy flow charts, and gravitational vectors. It wasn't giving orders. It was offering knowledge. It was teaching them how to use it. Vance felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility settle upon him. He was no longer just a commander of a survey vessel. He was the chosen steward of a relic of immense power and purpose. The scales must always be balanced. Solon interface with the new data stream. Vance ordered his mind racing to comprehend the sheer volume of information. Rostova plot firing solutions based on the provided vectors. Tanaka prepare to channel auxiliary power through the main deflector array. We're going to mirror their energy. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their confusion replaced by a shared sense of purpose. The bridge of the Pathfinder became an extension of the ancient intelligence of the Reckoning. The Saint ship was not a weapon to be wielded, but a teacher to be listened to. At the same moment, another fleet translated into the system, this one far from the anomaly's edge. The clean, severe lines of consensus Navy warships resolved into existence. The flagship, the CNS Arbitrator, was a vessel built to enforce order through overwhelming firepower. A message cold and official was broadcast system-wide. This is Captain Valerius of the Consensus Navy vessel Arbitrator. The Tartarus anomaly is a restricted zone. All unauthorized vessels are to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Unidentified construct, you are ordered to power down your systems. Vance felt a chill run down his spine. He was now caught between the lawless greed of the Vultures and the unyielding dogma of the Consensus. Kalen wanted to exploit the relic. Valerius wanted to control or destroy it. Neither of them understood what it truly was. He was the only one who had bothered to ask. A law without mercy is only tyranny. Ignore the Consensus hail for now, Vance set his eyes on the tactical plot. They are too far away to interfere. Our immediate threat is Kalen. The Reckoning continued to feed them information. It showed them the Vultures' power cores, the exact frequencies of their shields, the subtle instabilities in their stolen technology. It presented a ledger of their crimes, not in words, but in data energy signatures of raided colonies, ghost signals of destroyed merchant ships, records of planetary bombardments. It was a meticulous accounting of their sins. Vance saw the path forward, a strategy of beautiful, terrifying precision. It was not a plan of destruction, but of justice. Solon, can you use the data from the Reckoning to modulate our deflector shield? Affirmative, Commander. The data provides a perfect schematic of their energy systems. I can create a resonance frequency. Vance nodded. Do it. Rostova, target the Vulture flagship's primary energy conduits. Do not fire to destroy. Fire to disable. This was the moment of truth, the first act of the awakened judge. The teacher appears when the student is ready. The Pathfinder's single laser grid fired. It was not a blast of overwhelming power, but a thin, precise beam of carefully modulated light. It struck the Carrion Crown's shield, and instead of exploding, it passed through as if the shield wasn't there. The beam pierced the flagship's hull and struck the main power conduit. The effect was instantaneous. The Vulture ship went dark. Its lights flickered and died. Its weapon ports cooled. It was a ghost adrift in the void. Kalen's furious, panicked shouts were cut off as his comms system failed. One by one, the Pathfinder, guided by the ancient mind, began to systematically disarm the Vulture fleet. Each shot was a perfect surgical strike, a lesson in consequence. The smaller ships were neutralized with equal precision. Not a single hull was breached. Not a single life was lost. The pirates were left powerless, their tools of violence rendered inert. They were judged, and their sentence was impotence. The entire battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than a minute. The Vulture fleet, a terror of the outer sectors, was now just a collection of drifting metal coffins. A debt recorded is a debt that will be paid. On the bridge of the Pathfinder, there was a stunned silence. Rostova stared at her tactical screen, her expression unreadable. They're disabled. All of them. Their life support is functional, but their propulsion and weapon systems are completely fried. The energy feedback seems to have fused the primary circuits. Vance let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He felt the immense calm presence of the reckoning observing its work. It had not destroyed. It had corrected. It was then that he felt a new wave of information from the Saint ship. It was a history, a purpose. It explained its own creation in the forge of a dying star, a tool for a civilization that feared its own capacity for violence. This vessel teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The words echoed in his mind, a core tenet, a sacred trust. It was a weapon that could not be used for conquest, only for the restoration of balance. A tool designed to prevent the very atrocities that Kalen had committed. The cost of this first act became immediately apparent. Commander Tanaka called out, his voice tight with concern. The Reckoning's power core is showing a massive heat surge. That single system-wide tactical overlay and the data transmission, it cost them. Their thermal regulation systems are ancient. They can't sustain that kind of output. Vance understood. The giant was powerful, but it was also vulnerable. It was not a god. It was a machine, and it had just exerted itself for the first time in millennia. The strongest steel is forged in the coldest void. Now the CNS Arbitrator was closing the distance, its engines burning hard. Captain Valerius would have seen the entire exchange. He would have witnessed a single survey corvette neutralize a pirate fleet without casualties. He would not understand it, and what the consensus did not understand, it sought to contain. Valerius would see the reckoning not as a teacher, but as a weapon of unimaginable power that had just fallen into the hands of a rogue commander. Commander Vance, the voice of Captain Valerius, boomed across the comm, sharp and laced with suspicion. You will stand down immediately. Power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded. Explain your use of an unauthorized first colonial artifact. Your actions here today require a full accounting. Vance looked from the drifting Vulture fleet to the approaching consensus warships, then to the majestic, silent form of the Reckoning. He felt its quiet intelligence, its patient waiting. He had passed its test. Now he had to face his own people. He was no longer just Elias Vance, commander of the Pathfinder. He was the speaker for the scales, the steward of the ledger. He had a duty not just to the consensus, but to the ancient law that had just awakened. The choices he made next would not just determine his own fate, but could set a precedent for centuries to come. The universe was no longer silent, and he was the one who had to translate its first words. A mirror shows you only what you are. Vance keyed the comm, his voice calm and clear, ready to deliver his own answer to the approaching fleet. He had faced the lawless. Now he faced the lawmakers. He wondered which would prove to be the greater threat. On a dusty trading post hundreds of light years away, a grizzled data broker squinted at a cascade of encrypted code on his screen. He'd just intercepted a burst transmission from the Tartarus anomaly, a panicked data dump from a Vulture-affiliated listening post. The text was fragmented, almost nonsensical. It spoke of a ghost ship, a silent judge that didn't kill. It spoke of beams of light that didn't burn, but instead turned a ship's own power against itself. The final garbled line of text read, "It counts your sins. It knows what you stole. The ledger is open." The broker leaned back, a strange chill running down his spine. Something new was moving in the dark. Captain Valerius of the CNS Arbitrator watched the tactical replay for the third time. His bridge was a model of consensus military doctrine, cold, efficient, and gray. Every officer stood at their station with rigid discipline. Valerius himself was a man carved from the same material. His face was a mask of stern neutrality, but his mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The Pathfinder, a vessel with the armament of a shuttlecraft, had not fought the Vulture fleet. It had audited it. It had executed a flawless, non-lethal decapitation of a notorious pirate armada. "Report," Valerius said, his voice clipped. His tactical officer responded instantly. "Sir, the Vulture fleet is completely inert. We are reading stable life support on all vessels, but zero energy output from propulsion or weapon systems. It's as if their power cores were surgically disconnected. The phenomenon originated from the smaller corvette, but was clearly facilitated by the energy readings from the large construct." Valerius stared at the image of the reckoning. It was an affront to every known principle of naval design. It was alien in its sheer simplicity and scale. It was a variable he could not control. "You cannot outrun the consequences you create." Commander Vance is a historian, a diplomat. Valerius mused aloud, more to himself than to his crew. He is not a warrior. What has he stumbled upon? His second-in-command, a sharp-eyed woman named Commander Tasia, spoke up. "Sir, the energy signature from that construct is consistent with first colonial, alpha-level technology. Doctrine is clear. Such artifacts are to be contained, or if containment is not possible, neutralized. They are too dangerous to be left to individual discretion." Valerius knew the doctrine. He had written parts of it. But doctrine was designed for weapons, for ships of the line, for things that could be understood in terms of yield and armor. This was different. The elegance of the takedown, the absolute lack of collateral damage suggested a purpose, a philosophy behind the power. It was not the chaotic energy of a forgotten superweapon. It was the precise action of a thinking entity, and Vance somehow had communicated with it. "Open a channel to the Pathfinder," Valerius commanded. "Priority 1. I want to speak to the historian. The law is a shield, not just a sword." Vance's face appeared on the main screen of the arbitrator. He looked tired, but his eyes were firm. There was a new weight to his presence, a sense of authority that Valerius had not seen in his service record. Captain Valerius Vance began, his voice even. "I assume you have questions." "That is an understatement," Commander Valerius replied, his tone like ice. "You have violated consensus quarantine protocols. You have activated an artifact of immense power, and you have engaged a hostile force without authorization. By the articles of military law, I should arrest you and impound your ship." Vance did not flinch. "You saw what happened here, Captain. The Vulture fleet was not engaged. It was judged. This construct. The reckoning is not a weapon in the way you understand it. It is an arbiter." Valerius felt a surge of irritation. The man was speaking in metaphors. "I deal in facts, Commander, not poetry. The fact is you are in control of an asset that can disable an entire fleet in seconds. That asset belongs to the consensus, not to a civilian academic. A heavy truth is still the truth." "That's where you are mistaken," Captain Vance said, and his voice carried the resonance of his newfound conviction. "It doesn't belong to anyone. It serves a principle. It just demonstrated that principle on Kalen's fleet. They were disabled in direct proportion to the energy they were drawing for their weapons. The ship literally presented them with a bill for their aggression. On the bridge of the arbitrator, a low murmur went through the crew. Commander Tasia's eyes widened slightly. The concept was so alien, yet so perfectly logical. Valerius fell silent. A weapon that enforced a kind of cosmic justice. A ship that audited its enemies to death. It was madness. It was also the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered. If Vance was telling the truth, then this was a power that could shatter the current balance of the galaxy. If he was lying, then he was a clever manipulator who had just acquired a doomsday weapon. Either way, he could not be allowed to remain in control. "Your explanation is noted," Commander Valerius said finally, his voice flat and official. "But it does not change my orders. You will surrender control of the artifact to my technical teams. We will study it. We will determine its function and its threat level." Vance's expression hardened. "I cannot do that, Captain. This vessel has a purpose. It has chosen a steward. To hand it over to be dismantled and studied like a lab specimen would be a violation of that trust. It is not a thing to be controlled. It is a precedent to be learned from. A choice given is a test of character." The conversation had reached an impasse. Valerius saw a man radicalized by a forgotten power. Vance saw a man blinded by rigid doctrine. Both believed they were acting in the best interests of humanity. "Then you leave me no choice." Commander Valerius said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will enforce consensus law. You have 1 hour to comply. If you do not, I will consider you and that construct a hostile entity." The channel closed, leaving Vance's determined face frozen for a moment on the screen before it dissolved into static. Valerius turned to his tactical officer. "What is the status of the pulsar in this system?" "It's a neutron star, sir. Highly regular pulse rate 1 every 4.7 seconds. The vultures were using the magnetic field to help shield their energy signatures. Standard scavenger practice." Valerius looked at the tactical display. The massive form of the Reckoning, the tiny Pathfinder beside it, and his own fleet poised and ready. He had the firepower. He had the law on his side. But Vance had something else. He had a story. And stories Valerius knew could be more powerful than any canon. Every action writes a page in history. Aboard the Pathfinder, the mood was tense. "He's going to attack Rostova," stated her voice grim. "Valerius is a zealot for the rulebook. He sees us as a threat to established order." "He is not wrong," Solon commented calmly. "The introduction of this vessel's capabilities represents a paradigm shift. Established orders rarely welcome such events." Tanaka's voice came over the comm from engineering. "Commander, I've been analyzing the data from the Reckoning. Its power core is still in a critical state of heat recovery. We can't pull another stunt like the one we did on the Vultures. Not yet. We are for all intents and purposes defenseless." Vance stood before the main viewport watching the distant glittering forms of the consensus fleet. He felt the immense quiet presence of the Saint ship around him, a silent partner in this standoff. It offered no new solutions, no easy answers. It had given him the tools once. It had taught him a lesson. Now it was watching to see what he had learned. This was not a military problem. It was a legal one. Valerius was acting according to his understanding of the law. To fight him would be to become another Kalen, another aggressor. The wisest ruler knows when not to act. He had to find another way, a way that honored the principles of the Reckoning. It was a ship that taught by ledgers and mirrors. He had used it to present Kalen with a bill. Now he needed to use it to show Valerius a reflection of the very laws he claimed to uphold. Solon Vance set a plan beginning to form in his mind. I need you to access the entirety of the consensus legal code. Cross-reference it with the founding charters of the first colonial era. I'm looking for the principle of salvage rights versus the doctrine of technological containment. The AI's light pulsed. The legal frameworks are often contradictory, Commander. The consensus prioritizes security. The first colonial charters prioritized discovery. A court could argue this for years. That's exactly what I want, Vance said, a faint smile touching his lips. Valerius wants to write this story as a military confrontation. We are going to rewrite it as a legal hearing, and we are going to do it in a way that the entire sector can watch. He turned to Rostova. Ava, I need you to rig every single one of our external broadcast arrays. Link them to Solon. We're not going to jam the consensus fleet. We're going to give them a history lesson. A seed of doubt can fell a forest of certainty. On the arbitrator commander, Tasia watched the Pathfinder with a growing sense of unease. The smaller ship was making no moves to flee or fight. Instead, its communication arrays were glowing with activity. Sir, the Pathfinder is beginning a wide-beam broadcast. It's citing legal precedents, chapter and verse. They're broadcasting a formal declaration of salvage and stewardship, citing ancient maritime law and first colonial expansion mandates. Valerius frowned. Propaganda, a desperate attempt to justify his mutiny. Ignore it. Prepare the warning shots. But the broadcast continued. It was not just a dry recitation of laws. It was a narrative expertly woven by Vance and Solon. It told the story of their arrival, of the vulture's aggression, of the awakening of the ancient ship. It framed the entire event not as a military action, but as a moment of first contact with a sentient legal philosophy. It was a masterful piece of information warfare. Then the broadcast changed. The reckoning itself began to contribute. It opened a single low-bandwidth channel, and on it displayed one thing: the ledger. The record of the vulture's crimes displayed not as accusations, but as simple, undeniable data points. Energy signatures from their illegal weapons, trajectories of their raids, the ghost transponders of their victims. It was a silent, irrefutable testimony. Ignorance is a choice, not an excuse. The broadcast was public. It was being picked up by every ship, every station, every listening post in the sector. Valerius felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Vance had sidestepped the military confrontation entirely. He had placed Valerius in a courtroom of public opinion. If he fired on the Pathfinder now, he would not be seen as an enforcer of the law. He would be seen as a man trying to silence a witness. He would be destroying evidence. Tasia said, her voice quiet but firm. Multiple civilian news feeds are picking up the broadcast. The story is spreading. They're calling it the Judge of Tartarus. They are painting Vance as a hero. Valerius gripped the armrests of his command chair. The historian had outmaneuvered him completely. He had used the law, the very thing Valerius revered, as a weapon against him. He had turned the cold, hard logic of the consensus into a public relations nightmare. The pulsar at the heart of the system flashed its silent, rhythmic beat. A wave of energy washed through the void, a cosmic metronome counting down the seconds of the hour Valerius had given. He had a choice. He could follow his orders, open fire, and create a martyr. Or he could pause, acknowledge the legal complexities, and in doing so, risk appearing weak. For a man like Valerius, it was an impossible decision. He had come here to contain a weapon, but instead he found himself wrestling with an idea. And an idea was much harder to kill. The first law of power is to know its limits. Vance held his position, the silence on his bridge a stark contrast to the storm of data Solon was broadcasting into the void. He had thrown a gauntlet of jurisprudence at a man who only understood ballistics. Now he had to wait and see if the captain of the arbitrator was capable of learning a new game. Rostova stood beside him, her posture rigid, her hand resting near the tactical console, a silent testament to her readiness for a fight she hoped would not come. The pulsar flashed a steady, indifferent heartbeat for the drama unfolding in its light. On the arbitrator, Valerius felt the walls of his doctrine closing in. The broadcast was a brilliant move, a political checkmate that had neutralized his military advantage. His officers stood at their posts, their perfect discipline warring with the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They had heard the broadcast. They had seen the vulture's ledger. They were soldiers of the consensus sworn to uphold the law, and Vance was now arguing that law with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. A law ignored is a border erased. Commander Tasia Valerius said, his voice a low growl. Cut their broadcast. Jam their frequencies. All of them. Tasia hesitated a fractional moment that spoke volumes. Sir, that would be a clear violation of civilian information statutes. It would be perceived as an admission of wrongdoing. It would prove Vance's point. Valerius's jaw tightened. She was right. He was trapped. To use force was to become the tyrant Vance's narrative had painted him as. To do nothing was to cede authority. He needed a third option. A way to enforce the law without breaking it. A way to reassert control without firing a shot. His eyes fell upon the tactical display, noting the Pathfinder's proximity to the awakened relic. The key was the connection. Vance was not the power. He was merely the speaker. Sever the voice and the message dies. Launch the EW drones, Valerius ordered. Target the Pathfinder, not with jamming frequencies, with a cascade intrusion protocol. I want you to slice into their systems and sever the data link between them and the artifact. We will cut the historian's tongue legally. It was a precise technical move, not an act of war, but a targeted cyber attack justifiable under the Articles of Fleet Security and Evidence Containment. Tasia nodded, her expression relieved. This was a move she could execute. Drones are away, Captain. A swarm of small, sleek drones detached from the arbitrator, accelerating towards the Pathfinder. They were silent, running on minimal power, designed to be ghosts in the system. They were knives in the dark, aimed at the heart of Vance's newfound power. In a high-orbiting apartment overlooking the crystalline towers of Consensus Prime, a junior legal aide watched the unauthorized feed from the Tartarus system. Her superiors were already in frantic closed-door meetings. The broadcast from the Pathfinder had thrown the entire judiciary into chaos. It was a legal bombshell, a direct challenge to a century of established military doctrine. The aide watched the silent testimony of the vulture's ledger scroll across her screen. She saw the approaching EW drones. This was no longer just a military standoff. It was history being written in real time, and she had a front-row seat. Commander, we have incoming Solon, announced its voice perfectly level. Consensus drones deploying a focused intrusion suite. Their objective is to sever my connection with the Reckoning. Rostova cursed under her breath. A cyber attack. He's trying to blind us before he boards us. Vance watched the drone icons on the tactical plot. Valerius was clever. He had found a way to escalate without firing a shot. Now Vance had to respond in kind. He turned to the silent presence that filled his mind. How do we answer this? The truth is the only shield that never breaks. The reply from the Reckoning was not a tactic. It was a question. It showed him a mirror image of the approaching drones, But instead of focusing on their offensive capabilities, it highlighted their internal system. Their guidance software, their communication protocols, their energy regulation modules. All of it was consensus technology built to the highest, most exacting standards. Standards that were in practice impossible to perfectly maintain. The saintship was showing him the cracks in Valerius's own perfect machine. Solon Vance said, understanding dawning. Can you establish a dialogue with the drones? The AI paused. They are not designed for dialogue. Commander, they are tools. Everything is designed for dialogue if you speak its language, Vance countered. The reckoning is showing me their operational logs, their diagnostic subroutines. I don't want you to attack them. I want you to audit them. Use the pulsar's next magnetic wave as a carrier. Run a full diagnostic on them according to their own internal metrics and broadcast the results back to the arbitrator. A debt is not always measured in coin. It was a move of breathtaking audacity. He was going to use Valerius's own tools to judge them. Rostova stared at him, a slow grin spreading across her face. You're going to give his drones a performance review. Something like that, Vance said. Let's see how the captain feels when his own dedication to the rules is put under a microscope. Solon processed the command, its light pulsing with activity. It is an unorthodox strategy. But the logic is sound, preparing the diagnostic pulse, synchronizing with the pulsar. As the neutron star flashed, a wave of focused energy washed over the incoming drone swarm. It was not destructive. It was inquisitive. On the bridge of the arbitrator, a cascade of alerts suddenly flooded a diagnostic sub-panel. Tasia's eyes went wide. Sir, I don't understand. We are receiving a report. A full systems analysis of our own drone squadron. It's being sent to us from the Pathfinder. Valerius stepped closer, staring at the screen. The report was brutally precise. It detailed every minor flaw, every fractional deviation from the consensus's own impossibly high technical specifications. Drone 7 had a microvariance in its power regulation, a 0.02% energy leak. Drone 4's navigational thruster was misaligned by 1,000th of a degree. Drone 11 was running a version of intrusion software that was 3 hours out of date. None of the flaws were mission critical, but they were all technically violations of protocol. The smallest crack can shatter the strongest wall. Vance had not attacked his drones. He had embarrassed them. He had used Valerius's own obsession with perfection as a weapon against him, and he had done it publicly. The diagnostic report was now appended to the main broadcast for the entire sector to see. The message was clear. You who would judge me first, judge yourself. Valerius felt a hot flush of anger. The historian was mocking him, turning his military precision into a joke. Bring the drones back, Valerius snapped. His gambit had failed. Worse, it had backfired, making him look foolish. He had tried to cut the tongue of the speaker, and instead had his own grammar corrected in front of an audience of billions. He needed to regain control of the narrative. He needed an authority that Vance could not question. Get me a priority channel to the Sector Judiciary Command, he ordered. I am petitioning for a legal writ of intercession. We are past military action. This is now a matter for the highest courts. He was escalating again, moving the conflict from the battlefield and the network to the courtroom. It was a tacit admission that Vance had won the last 2 rounds. But it was also a dangerous move for Vance. The consensus judiciary was an ancient labyrinthine institution. Its wheels turned slowly, but they ground exceedingly fine, and they were not known for their sentimentality. A mirror held to power often becomes a target. On the Pathfinder, Solon reported the drone squadron's retreat. Captain Valerius is hailing the sector judiciary commander. He is attempting to escalate the legal challenge to a level beyond your authority. Vance had expected this. Valerius was a creature of systems and hierarchies. If he could not win on one level, he would simply move to the next. But this too was a trap. The Reckoning was not a party to consensus law. It was a law unto itself. Its authority was older, more fundamental. Let him make his call, Vance said. He is trying to make this a local matter, a problem for the courts. We need to make it a universal one. He looked to the silent waiting form of the Saint ship. It had shown him how to mirror aggression and how to audit tools. Now it was time for the next lesson. What is the purpose of a law that is not known? The question hung in his mind, and the answer bloomed with perfect clarity. A law unpublished is a tyranny in waiting. The Reckoning began to stir. Not with a surge of power, but with a deep resonant hum that vibrated through the hulls of every ship in the system. Its vast obsidian surface began to glow, the trillions of tiny sigils lighting up in sequence. It was preparing for an act of immense significance. It was not just an archive, it was a publisher, a broadcaster of principles. Solon, what is it doing? Rostova asked, her voice hushed with awe. The AI's light column glowed with an intensity that bordered on reverence. It is preparing to transmit its founding charter, its core legal philosophy, not as a single message, but as a modulated gravitational wave. It is going to carve its principles into the very fabric of space-time. It will be detectable for 1,000 light-years in every direction. It will be permanent. Vance felt a profound sense of destiny settle over him. He was no longer just a steward. He was a witness to a revelation. The universe remembers what is written in its bones. The act would come at a terrible cost. Commander Tanaka reported from engineering, his voice strained. The energy buildup within the artifact is astronomical. It's channeling power from the anomaly itself. The thermal load will be catastrophic. It may not survive the broadcast. It's choosing to burn itself out to make its statement. Vance understood the sacrifice. The Saint ship was willing to destroy itself to ensure its laws were known. It was the ultimate act of faith in the power of precedent. Is there anything we can do? Vance asked, his heart heavy. There might be one thing, Tanaka replied, his words hesitant. The system survey mentioned a partially completed Dyson ring fragment on the far side of the star. First colonial era abandoned. If we could get the Reckoning to it, we might be able to use the fragment's radiator arrays to help it shed the heat after the broadcast. It's a long shot. A very long shot. Vance made the decision in an instant. Solon, transmit our intention to the Saint ship. Let it know we will help it survive. Rostova, plot a course to the Dyson fragment. Maximum possible speed. This was the new plan. They would not just witness the revelation. They would protect the revelator. The stakes had escalated from a standoff to a desperate race against time and thermodynamics. A race to save the soul of a starship that was about to sacrifice itself for an idea. A promise to the dying is the most sacred debt. On the arbitrator, the energy readings from the Reckoning sent the bridge into a state of controlled panic. Sir, the artifact is going to detonate, his science officer exclaimed. The energy levels are approaching. Nova scale. Valerius stared, his mind refusing to process the data. This was not a weapon. A weapon did not commit suicide. This was something else entirely. This was a statement. Then he saw the Pathfinder begin to move, nudging the vast construct, pushing it slowly, painstakingly, towards the far side of the system. towards the Dyson ruins. He saw Vance's plan. The historian was trying to save the source of the broadcast. He was acting not as a soldier, but as a guardian, a priest tending to his god. And in that moment, something in Captain Valerius finally broke. His rigid adherence to doctrine, his suspicion, his anger, it all washed away, replaced by a profound and terrifying sense of awe. He was witnessing an act of faith so pure, it defied all of his tactical and legal training. He had come to contain a threat and had instead found a sermon written in the language of stars. A man is not defined by his orders, but by his choices. Helm Valerius said, his voice quiet but clear. Match course and speed with the Pathfinder. Stay at a respectful distance. Tactical stand down all weapon systems. Open a channel to Commander Vance. His crew stared at him stunned. Commander Tasia looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Sir, you have your orders, Commander Valerius said, his eyes fixed on the two ships beginning their slow, desperate pilgrimage across the system. We are going to help them. Aboard a long-range courier vessel halfway across the sector, the ship's grizzled pilot nearly dropped his mug of synth coffee. A new signal was coming in, overriding every channel. It wasn't audio. It wasn't visual. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant pattern that seemed to hum in the very structure of his ship. It was a wave of pure concept, a set of principles that were as elegant and undeniable as the laws of physics. The pilot, a man who hadn't thought about philosophy since his academy days, found himself captivated. He was listening to the birth of a new scripture. The journey to the Dyson fragment was a silent, solemn procession. The two consensus warships had taken up escort positions, their presence no longer a threat, but a shield. Valerius had offered the use of his ship's tractor beams to help, but the connection was too delicate. Only the Pathfinder, with its intimate data link, could guide the great ship. Vance felt the immense strain on his own vessel. The Pathfinder's engines were burning at their absolute limit, its small frame trembling with the effort of nudging a vessel thousands of times its mass. The heat radiating from the reckoning was already a palpable force, a wave of palpable energy that made the Pathfinder's hull creak and groan. A shared burden is a burden halved. Hull temperature is rising past the safety margins, Tanaka reported, his voice grim. Another hour of this and our outer plating will start to buckle. We don't have another hour, Rostova countered, her eyes on the energy readings from the Saint ship. The broadcast is imminent. As she spoke, the great hum reached its crescendo. A wave of gravitational energy, flawlessly modulated, erupted from the reckoning. It was a message of pure law, a declaration of principles that washed over the system, over the sector, over the galaxy. It is the duty of the strong to protect, not to rule. A debt of violence must be paid with justice, not with blood. The ledger remembers all ink, whether shed in honor or in shame. A mirror must be offered before a sword is drawn. The law is the property of all, not the weapon of the few. The principles flowed outwards, a new constant in the cosmic background. The broadcast was complete, and the price was now due. The light from the reckoning faded, replaced by an angry, malevolent, cherry-red glow. The heat it had contained was now erupting. Thermal cascade is starting. Tanaka yelled. It's tearing itself apart. We're almost there. Vance urged, his eyes locked on the skeletal remains of the Dyson ring ahead. It was a vast, broken circle of ancient metal and dormant technology, a monument to a forgotten ambition. Solon interface with the ring's radiator systems. Find a functional array. Searching Commander, the AI replied. The systems are ancient, but robust. I have found a network of thermal dispersion veins that are still structurally intact. I will attempt to activate them. The last step is always the longest. The Pathfinder guided the hemorrhaging Saint ship into the shadow of the Dyson fragment. The scale of the structure was immense. The reckoning looked like a needle next to a mountain. Solon, with the help of the consensus ship's computers, managed to interface with the dormant ring systems. With a groaning shudder that echoed across the void, a section of the Dyson ring came to life. Vast kilometers-long radiator fins extended from the structure, glowing with a faint blue light as they powered up for the first time in an age. Vance carefully maneuvered the reckoning into position, nesting it against the massive cooling arrays. For a moment, nothing happened. The red glow of the dying ship only intensified. Then, with a sudden, silent flare of energy, the connection was made. The heat, the catastrophic world-breaking energy, began to flow from the Saint ship into the Dyson ring. The radiator fins glowed brighter and brighter, shifting from blue to white to a brilliant incandescent gold as they absorbed the thermal load and vented it as harmless radiation into the void. The process was slow, agonizingly slow. The red glow of the reckoning began to recede, fading back to its placid obsidian blackness. The thermal alarms on the Pathfinder's bridge fell silent one by one. The crisis was passing. They had done it. They had saved the judge. Vance slumped into his command chair, the exhaustion of the last few hours hitting him like a physical blow. His ship was damaged, its hull scorched and strained. His crew was exhausted, but they were alive, and the universe was now listening to a new song. A scar is proof that a wound can heal. Just as the last of the thermal warnings vanished, a new ship translated into the system. It was not a military vessel. It was a sleek white courier bearing the sigil of the consensus judiciary. A single authoritative voice cut through the comm channels. "This is Legate Orana of the Sector Judiciary. By the authority of the High Court, I am taking command of this situation. All vessels will hold their current positions. Commander Vance, Captain Valerius. I have a great many questions for you both." The final act had begun. Not a battle, but a hearing. The arrival of the legate changed everything. She was not a soldier or a scientist. She was a judge, and she had come to the place where a new law had just been born. Vance looked at Valerius's face on the secondary screen. The captain looked humbled, his certainty replaced by a newfound respect. The conflict between them was over. Now they both had to answer to a higher authority, one that for the first time had to consider a precedent that was older than the consensus itself. The legate's vessel approached the silent cooling form of the reckoning with a caution that bordered on reverence. Her voice, when she next spoke, was directed only at Vance. "Commander, the entire galactic network is buzzing with your broadcast. You have given a voice to something that has been silent for millennia. The High Court wishes to understand what it has said." Vance took a deep breath. He had been a commander, a steward, a guardian. Now he had to be a translator. He had to explain the meaning of the scales to a galaxy that had long forgotten the meaning of true balance. The counting is done, and the verdict is rendered. The formal inquest took place in the data space of the legate's ship, a neutral ground. Vance, Valerius, and Solon presented their logs, their recordings, their testimonies. But the key witness was the reckoning itself. It did not speak in words, but it opened its ledgers. It showed the legate the vulture's crimes. It showed her the cold logic of its judgment. It showed her its own history, its purpose, its creation, as a safeguard against the very kind of doctrinal rigidity that Valerius had embodied. Legate Orana was a woman whose face betrayed no emotion, but Vance could feel the weight of her intellect, the careful, precise way she processed every piece of information. She listened for 3 full cycles, asking few questions, letting the evidence speak for itself. At the end, she fell silent for a long time. The fate of the most important discovery in human history rested on her judgment. Finally, she spoke, her voice broadcast to all ships in the system and into the official record. The actions of the Vulture fleet are a matter of criminal record. They will be taken into custody, and their sentence will be carried out. The actions of Captain Valerius were conducted according to established consensus military doctrine. He acted in what he believed to be good faith. However, doctrine is not immutable. It must adapt to new realities. She paused, her gaze even through the screen seeming to pierce right through Vance. The entity known as the Reckoning cannot be classified as a weapon, a vessel, or an artifact under any existing legal framework. It is a court, an independent legal entity with its own undeniable precedent. As such, it cannot be impounded, controlled, or decommissioned. It can only be consulted. This was it, the precedent lock. Therefore, by the authority vested in me, I declare a new legal precedent. The Reckoning is granted the status of a protected sovereign entity. Its stewardship is granted to the man it chose, Commander Elias Vance, who is hereby given the provisional title of interlocutor. He and his crew will be the sole guardians of this new principle. They will be a new branch of the law independent of the military, dedicated to understanding the balance this vessel represents. The interior of the Reckoning pulsed with a soft silver light, its systems cool and stable. On a display that had not been active for 10,000 years, a new entry blinked into existence. It was not a record of a crime or a debt. It was the text of the legate's ruling a new law entered into the oldest ledger. Vance felt a sense of profound peace. The battle was won. Not with guns, but with ideas. He had chosen the lawful path, and in doing so had reminded the galaxy that justice is not about punishment, but about balance. That a law without wisdom is just a cage, and that even after millennia of silence, the right voice at the right time can change the universe forever. A single correct choice weighs more than 1,000 victories.